Hi guys, this is GM Life Coach. I'm here with Zakiyaa. We are outside this time rather than being in each other's houses or in the studio. We're taking it easy. So, how you doing, Zakiyaa?
I am very well. I'm really, really well, GM, the Life Coach. How are you?
Yeah, man. I'm good. I'm glad we did this as well. It's really nice.
Yeah.
We've got a couple cider out here. We're just chilling.
We're
got
doing
the music in the
outside,
background.
man. We're doing outside.
Exactly.
We with the trees.
With the trees and nature.
You know?
Got a little basketball behind us. We've got little music in the background. So if you hear any noise, guys, we're just outside, just shooting the breeze. Literally.
Yeah, shooting the breeze. Literally. I love that.
Exactly. Right. So today's talk, we're going to talk a little bit about education, and we're going to go to a couple of other topics on the way. But for now, I want to talk about education, and I feel like it's something that we always seem to go back to when we're talking, because we always seem to think about our experience of education, whether it's you with your son, whether it's me working in education and how much I've kind of had to stain for some parts of it. Do you know what I mean? The way that they educate our kids.
The system of education in this country. Yeah. Definitely.
What's education been like for you?
Education for me has been, it's hard to actually, that's a really good question. I have always loved education. However, I've had a very difficult and strenuous relationship with it. Part of that is because I have additional needs, or special needs, as some people characterize it. And part of it has also been because of, the systemic inequalities within education and the access to it. So I have a really difficult experience and journey with education, but ultimately I love knowledge and I love information, and education it's just imperative, it's important, and I love it, and I wish that people would have the ability to have the same level of excitement or enthusiasm about it as I do. But I ultimately understand why it's difficult, because it's quite an elitist thing, like the ideology of education. The fact that if you receive a state education versus a private education, you're ultimately going to have a very different experience. I'm aware that is very much what a lot of us experience. And so I love education, but I do see
did you thrive in the state education?
Absolutely not.
Oh, no. Why not?
I absolutely did not thrive. I felt like I was demonized for being intelligent. Like I would say I'm very intellectual as a person. My mind, as I said, I enjoy knowledge. I love knowledge. So I've always been very curious. I've always asked questions. I've always wanted to understand. And when being in school, for example, in secondary school, let me take it further back. In primary school, I would be told that I was too hyperactive, or I was too, I was just non-conformist, basically. And secondary school, I was labeled with things like being challenging, or being a troublemaker, or starting problems, or, I had there's one memory that I have that stands out. I was in RE, and, I had this teacher telling me about white Jesus, and I challenged him, and I was like, this doesn't even make sense geographically, because what I understand about geography is that the people that come from this region of the world cannot look like what you're telling me this man looks like. So I'm challenging, and he shouted in my face. He walked over to my table, shouted in my face, and basically attempted to grab my arm and remove me from the class, and was like, get out of my class.
How old were you?
I was like 12. I was in year 7, year 8. I think I was 12. I think my birthday's in December, so I was in year 7.
That's mine's too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. See it there. Woo, woo. Come on, December gang. But yeah, I was removed from the class, and I was sent to the headmaster's office, and I was shouted at there. I was threatened there. So yeah, and all because I made an acute observation that was, I'd learned about geographically the region of the world this man is telling me these people are from. And I questioned his, validity on whether or not the information he was giving us as a class was correct. And he didn't like it. So
you should, though. You should ask questions.
Right. And that's, my dad always told me ask questions. And so I do. But ultimately, I wasn't congratulated for that. I wasn't encouraged to do that. In fact, it was the opposite. It was shut down. It was stop talking, stop, we don't want your opinion here.
Wow.
You're causing issues, you're being disruptive, you're this, you're this, you're this. But in actual fact, it was, I was highly intelligent and I challenged adults and they didn't like it. And, when you look like us and you're coming from where we come from and you're being educated by, middle class white people, they don't appreciate these things.
Yeah.
It's that mindset of, how dare you, the audacity of you. You're not even supposed to know this stuff. Why are you able to challenge me and make me look stupid or make me feel a certain way? You're a child. So
With other kids that
there were a few kids in my class in my year that, in all honesty, most of the kids that I was in school with were very intelligent, but a lot of them probably went down the path of misbehaving or being labeled in that way because it was easier. It was almost expected by the school and the staff that we would be troublemakers or not amount to anything. And so I think a lot of kids kind of just fell into that as a matter of survival in school. I ended up ultimately dropping out of school in year 9. So I didn't finish my high school education, but I do know that had I had finished, I think it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference, honestly.
Yeah.
So, it was interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time.
So then, all right. So then you said that you had additional needs, but I know some of those were addressed when you were a little bit older.
Yeah. They're only really being addressed now as an adult.
Oh, wow.
I always knew that I had a different brain. As I said, I come from a neurodiverse family. So, but the interesting thing about certain things, like, for example, ADHD, a lot of people were led to believe that ADHD only affected boys. And that's just not true. The reality is that women or females were excluded from any ADHD trials and information and research until 2002. So in the grand scheme of things, that's very recent time. Most of us were alive at this point. And, to think that this is something that has affected, that does affect so many people. There is a high amount of women now being diagnosed with what they consider to be adult ADHD, which I do not like that term because ADHD is a neurological condition and it's something you are ultimately born with. But because they were not being diagnosed when they were younger, they're being diagnosed as adults now. So I think women make up the highest percentage of diagnosis in recent years because of that. So now that they've included us in the studies, they now see, okay, women have this and, it's affecting a lot of women.
They say that it's harder to detect in girls, right?
They say that, but it's actually because, in my opinion, a lot of that is due to the gender conforms of society or the gender norms of society. So what they call, a lot of women being diagnosed are diagnosed with the inattentive type, which is not necessarily the type of hyperactivity. It's more the type of not being able to focus and multitask in certain other areas and whatnot. But what it really means to me is that when little boys are jumping up and down and climbing the walls as a child, they're just being little boys. But if girls are doing that, then there's something, not quite right. And so we expect and we educate our girls to not behave like boys. We tell them that's not ladylike.
Yeah.
You shouldn't behave like that. That's for boys. You're a girl. And I was very much a tomboy growing up. And so I was very active and I was very much, like that. So I can appreciate that I have always been a bit of a nonconformist in that sense. And I love that about myself, honestly. But yeah, I think that's really more the bigger picture is that girls don't present in the same way because ultimately our families and society in general teach us not to behave like that. So it's kind of drummed out of you at an early age that that's not acceptable behavior if you're a female. And I think that's why the presentation is so different where women and men are concerned.
Yeah. Excuse the noise, guys. There's a truck that just fired up next to us, but we're gonna go anyway. We'll keep going. So all right. So your son has his experience with education, and we touched on it a little bit on our first podcast that we had with you. Tell me about that journey, because I know it's not been an easy one, because I know you have to do some proper going there.
Yeah,
with hours.
Wow. Where to start? Okay, so ultimately, my son has autism, and he was diagnosed in I think 2015, 2016, and basically he was not receiving the type of support that he should be with that diagnosis. And so I kind of went into like research mode. And
what actually was his diagnosis? What did they say?
He ASD, so autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
And he's kind of he's high functioning autistic, and I think that is the case for a lot of kids, especially kids in our communities. As a matter of just survival, I think our kids are generally, we're just, as people, we're very adaptable. And so we adapt with whatever we can and however we can. So my son is high functioning. And what that means is that if you're looking at him specifically, you might not necessarily be able to see or know just from having a conversation with him that he is autistic.
Yeah.
But if you spend enough time with him, you'll start to understand. Quite like myself, I too am autistic. So if you spend enough time with me, you'll start to see and understand, okay, yeah, there are certain things, like sensory needs and just processing of information and certain things that are used to self-soothe or stimulate. So there's a thing called stimming that a lot of people with neurodiversities do, which is where they find ways to cope with, the world around them. So for me, if I'm on the tube, I can't deal with the noise, so I have to have like headphones, for example. Or if I'm out and about, sometimes I need to wear sunglasses because there's too much stimulation visually and stuff like that. But getting back to why my journey with my son ended up becoming quite extreme is because my son had finished primary school and was on finishing primary school, and it was now the time that we would pick a secondary school. And with children with disabilities, their parents have the right effectively to basically send them wherever they want. That's basically how, what it is. So if your child doesn't have those diagnoses or disabilities or anything like that, it's called an EHCP. So it's an educational health and care plan. That is what replaced what we used to call the statement. So if people were statemented, it would mean that they had some sort of diagnosis.
Extra help and stuff like that in the classroom.
So the new age language is EHCP. And basically EHCP is a health document for your child's educational needs and their social needs and just their needs in general. But ultimately it looks at the best ways to support them whilst they're in education. And part of that is obviously schooling or school setting. My son was given that same form for me to fill out, which was like, the average child will have 5 schools, or the parents will have 5 schools to choose from, and they'll put their top choice at number 1 and so on and so forth. With kids with additional needs, they are given 3 choices, and the top choice is usually the choice that is ultimately